Welcome back. This is board certified neuropsychologist, and I am here with a talk that I have wanted to do for so long. There are so many people that come to see me as a neuropsychologist for memory evaluations. And once we go through their history, what we figure out is they are a trauma survivor. And I absolutely love doing the feedbacks and education sessions with these folks to help them understand there's not anything neurologically wrong here. This is actually a psychological block, barrier, defense mechanism that once you understand and you can let go of some anxiety about it, the more you're going to be able to focus, make memories, and live the best life that you possibly can. So today, we're going to talk about kind of the science behind memory issues and trauma and also the psychological theories, because I want you to understand what's going on in your own body and in your own mind. So let's start off by just defining what trauma is. Trauma is anything that overwhelms our ability to cope. Trauma is cumulative. Trauma tends to play itself out in the same domain in which it happened. So if your traumas are due to natural disasters, you're going to be monitoring the skies for darkening clouds, the threat of rain, how is the wind feeling on your face. If your traumas have been interpersonal, this is where you're going to do your hypervigilance and your monitoring. You're going to be thinking a lot about people's trustworthiness, how much you can actually feel safe around them. Do they really do what they say and say what they mean and do what they feel, right? We're really thinking a lot about motivation here. So when we live in the land of trauma, it changes the way we process information. And one of the big ways that gets changed is our ability to pay attention and our ability to remember what we paid attention to. So let's actually start off with attention. So when you are living as a trauma survivor, you are not able to focus in reality 100%. The truth is you are very absorbed with monitoring your own body for symptoms of being overwhelmed and monitoring that context or that domain in which your traumas happen. And for so many of us, it is social, it's other people, and we're social animals. So we spend a lot of time in relationship with one another. And if you're someone who's been hurt by other people, especially through roles where it's just wrong that somebody would hurt another person, like a parent or a sibling, a boss, a doctor. Those things actually are more traumatic to us than if we can put them in the normal slot of, well, bad strangers do bad things, right? So the closer the person was who hurt you, you're actually gonna have a tendency to be more traumatized. So when that happens, you're doing a lot of monitoring of relationships, and that takes away your focus and attention from what is ever at hand. So let's just say you're in college and you're trying to sit there and take a test. There's 25 other students around you. If you're a trauma survivor, are you going to be able to simply look down at your piece of paper and truly engross yourself in the questions at hand? No. You're going to be paying attention to noises that happen, who's coming in and out of the room, where's your back in relationship to other people, how is the guy next to you breathing, and what does that mean for your own safety? And some of these things are even like unconscious. They're not even like, oh, I'm going to monitor the environment, but they do minimize your ability to focus on the here and now that you want to. So we call this really selective attention, and it's very, very hard to do when you're a trauma survivor. This means you're actually not able to make a full memory of what's happening in the first place. So that's the first thing that can go wrong. The second thing in trauma survivors is the actual laying down of the memory. So the most common defense mechanism when we're overwhelmed is we're not going to encode a memory. Our brain actually makes it so we can't either remember the whole event through dissociation, or we remember it in weird ways and it's kind of fragmented, or emotional parts of it are more intense than reality parts, or parts are sped up, or trauma memories are different. They are a little bit off. You can feel like you're remembering them from a third person perspective, not necessarily an autobiographical perspective. So when we are experiencing an acute trauma, that's the first thing I want you to know is you're not really remembering everything, and you're remembering bits and pieces. So once the brain learns how to do this, all other things that fall in that threat bucket, now this is a whole spectrum of stressors from like I'm about to be assaulted at its most extreme, all the way up to, I'm not sure, that teacher seemed to be looking at me a little bit weird today. Is she mad? She doesn't like my essay, right? It all is in the spectrum of threat. So once your brain decides we are working on primary amygdala activation, your brain can go into this mode of information processing where you are, in a lightning fast way, trying to determine how much of a threat this is and what are my resources for coping with it. And that means you're not fully taking it all in as it's happening. So when you go to remember something, you actually weren't present enough in the moment to lay it down as a full, comprehensive memory. So a lot of people will say, I remember parts of it and I don't remember other parts. Well, the question is, how mindful were you in the moment? Were you actually more in a future prediction mode, which is where we tend to live as trauma survivors? It's actually not so much living in the past. It's more, how do I maintain my basic integrity and safety in the context of a possible threat? So trauma does also change the judgments with which we decide things are stressful or threatening. So we get very black or white. We are operating from that fear center, the amygdala, and that amygdala wants an answer fast. It wants to know, how threatening is this? And like I said, what are the resources? What am I going to do about it? That fight or flight response changes the way that we are able to encode information. There is also a relationship between the stress hormones that your body is excreting in the adrenal glands, the relationship between the vagus nerve, the gut, and the brain. It's not necessarily all just pure brain, pure cortex, subcortical structures. It's also stress hormones. So we know that over time, the more cortisol, adrenaline you release, the more it's going to impact the memory centers in your brain. Now, what's interesting is we used to think the relationship went too much cortisol, smaller or shrinking hippocampus. And then there was some research by some twin studies of Vietnam vets where they had two brothers who went to Vietnam, and one was both were exposed to highly stressful events, but only one developed PTSD. And what they figured out is the one with PTSD had a smaller hippocampus. So what we thought for years, even when I was training, was that the trauma shrunk the memory center of the brain. And then what they figured out is actually the relationship they decided was the reverse. So the one who was more susceptible to the traumatic effects and developing PTSD had a smaller hippocampus to start out with. So less of an ability to make memories. It's really interesting. So memories have this way of changing once they're laid down in our brain. So this is kind of a deep neuropsychological thought. So our memories are really not full reality. Our memories are how we integrate them with our previous life history, the meaning with which we assign them, and really it's all about how they fit into the bigger life story that we have told ourselves. And when all of this activity is happening is during deep sleep. So if you are a trauma survivor, chances are you have some level of sleep disturbance. That's very, very, very common. So we know that trauma is integrated in that REM sleep, and its function is to really make it make sense with the backdrop of our life. And this is what nightmares are. It's pushing up against the values and the beliefs that we have, and it just won't fit. So things like, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Well, I'm a good person and a bad thing happened to me. So how is my brain going to actually make that make sense, make it integrated? So typically we are not getting long, consistent sleep cycles of in and out of REM sleep. And that is keeping the trauma somewhat more fragmented and therefore influential on our information processing. So when we're very stressed, I mean, even if you don't have PTSD, you know this, it's very hard to fall asleep because there's a certain amount of safety in our body and in the world that has to happen in order to accept sleep. Isn't it interesting? We cannot force sleep. Sleep is a state that we must kind of succumb to. And there's a certain amount of giving up the ghost, trusting the process. And that is very, very hard for people who have experienced trauma. So the two main information processing ways that memories get distorted in PTSD are the attention that I talked about. And also it's that difficulty with working memory. So this is where we can really struggle with trying to manipulate multiple things that are happening at one time, because remember, we're not just dealing with the outside world. Trauma survivors are also doing a lot of managing on the inside. So they get very cognitively overloaded very quickly, and this reduces the brain's ability to pay attention to what's happening in the here and now. So how can you help yourself throughout this? First thing, I really believe knowledge is power. So if this resonates, maybe you can let go of some of the ideas or fears you've been carrying around with you that you're developing dementia, you're losing your mind, there's something deeply wrong with you. If you're a trauma survivor, there are cognitive symptoms. It's not just a state of emotional discomfort or anxiety. It changes the way your nervous system works, and that includes the way you process information. Do not shame yourself if you are struggling with memory. I'd like you to take a curious mindset instead and believe that this is yet another treatable part of PTSD. Ask for a referral to a board-certified neuropsychologist. You've just heard from one. If this feels like it resonates with you, look us up. Go on Google, put in find a board-certified neuropsychologist close to me. You'll get to a website where you can put your zip code in, find the person closest to you, ask your primary care doc if you're in the US, can you send me a referral to this person? Go and explain to them, this is the stuff I'm thinking in real life is not normal, and I would really love someone to do a personal assessment of what's changing for me. So I hope this made you think about your forgetting maybe in a little bit of a different way, gave you some much needed peace of mind. See you next time. Bye.